New Warzone drops and everyone wants to know the meta. I think right now it is pretty hard to kind of nail down what is the absolute meta. I think there's a couple of standouts, which I'm going to focus on today's video, but this is just pure preliminary. There's still a lot of MW2 weapons. We'll kind of see how they fit in the mix. No majority of people are really trying out MW3 weapons. As you should. They're brand new. If you have them leveled, you can enjoy them. Even though TTK isn't the most important stat, we can see that true game data, he actually has Warzone updated, but it looks like specifically with the MW3 weapons, which is important without some of the aftermarket parts, but it's a good starting point. We got all the different damage values. You can see the various TTKs at the different health points, and you kind of look at the various graphs, see where things are at, and kind of compare them to mine. Now, my TTK might be slightly different. I plug these values in, and I have maybe a different metric that I use for my combination shot placement. So it's worth checking out. There's going to be a couple guns that maybe even have a slower TTK, but that's because we're looking more at the practical TTK, even though you can get faster TTKs if you get more headshots in the mix. So definitely check it out if you want to kind of deep dive, look at what works best for you and kind of where things sit TTK wise. So for my spreadsheet, I have all those numbers kind of plugged in and kind of figuring out where the TTKs sit. I think some of the MW2 ones still need more testing because they might have made some more subtle changes that aren't accounted for yet, but this kind of gives us a rough estimate kind of where to start. And this is the top 75 TTKs out of the 100+ weapons that are currently in the game. For close range, that is their first damage profile, and the far TTK, which is their last damage profile. There's probably sleepers in the mix where maybe they have a long first damage profile that will actually make them better in certain situations, or they have that middle damage profile, which can actually allow them to excel, and it goes out to a pretty far distance before they get to their far range TTK. But as of right now, like I said, it's preliminary, and there's a bunch of weapons we're going to give you loadouts for, and I thought I'd focus on these. So we have a bunch of blue ones. Those are ones that maybe I'm not necessarily going to give a class setup for today. Maybe one or two of them I will, but I want to go ahead and put those notes there so you can kind of see what's going on with those. A lot of people will ask, what happened with the MCW? It is low on the TTK chart, even though it's super accurate. Maybe once there's a tuning on these top weapons, it may come into the mix, but something to keep in mind, this is kind of where we're at. It looks like the WSP is probably hands down the best gun currently. We have the Pulemyot, which is also pretty good. You can kind of see my notes for each of these if you kind of want to pause that, look at what's going on and look at the TTKs, kind of see why I've made certain decisions about certain weapons. Pretty much the yellow ones, we're going to be giving you loadouts on all of those, so we'll go ahead and jump into those. Thankfully, this game does not have tuning, so this will be much smoother and quicker, and I'll go ahead and kind of explain stuff. The WSP, I didn't really even want to include it, but it's slightly slower TTK that range up to 22 meters is huge, and it kind of looks nice with the little red blueprint that we got and the zombies camo. So W on that. But regardless of that, you can kind of see how the loadout, I have all of them built with the suppressor. If you want to have less recoil and show up on the minimap, that's up to you. All of my loadouts will pretty much have a suppressor because I prefer staying off the minimap when I fire my weapon. And I think there's a lot of you out there, it's the same thing. Some of these attachments also come with a bunch of pros and no cons. So we can go ahead and look at this D37 grip, and it says aiming idle sway. But when I go ahead and look at the overall stats, you can see that this is just improving our recoil without the cost to ADS speed, movement speed, which are important in SMGs, and a lot of these things I'm talking about will carry over to the main thing. Obviously, my camera may block some of the stuff, but you can see it for yourself. We go ahead and use hollow point just because those are still broken until those aren't. We got the Bruen heavy support. This one's probably going to be a good go-to. It does slow down your ADS just a little bit, but the recoil on the horizontal and recoil gun kick are huge, that it's enough for me to put that weapon on. A suppressor that we're putting basically this one on that's not hurting our ADS speed. We could go with other ones that definitely help with our range, which isn't necessary, or our recoil. And then we'd have these huge ADS penalties up over 330 milliseconds, which we do not want. So you can kind of go ahead and see how this one works. Pretty straightforward on the class. We'll go ahead and come through here and pretty good, 15 meters. It goes up to about 20 meters, which is a little bit short of the second target. Even though I'm not a fan of iron sights on this thing, it does look pretty clean. That's going to bring us to our next gun, which in no particular order, you can kind of choose what works best for you. I want to include a few guns to at least start off with if you had already leveled some and not others, while you do level some of the absolute meta like the WSP currently, which I'm expecting to get a nerf. These TTKs for long range are insane. The close range, they might even need a slight buff to some of the MWIII guns to compete with the MW2 guns, because many of them are still very good. And then we got the Bruen 60 mag. It's kind of the return of this, setup. We have a slightly different build for it. As you can see here, we're using this broadhead on a lot of these guns because the penalty to ADS is a little bit much, but it's giving us quite a bit on the other stuff, and the range, even though you are getting a negative, the range is perfectly fine. The rear grip, kind of see how that's built out, and the optic, you could use the aim up, you can use this choreo, which a lot of people are leaning towards. There's a lot of different ones you can use. I haven't spent enough time trying other ones, especially like the VOK. I mean, probably has still too much zoom. I think they still need some tuning, because some of the guns, I don't know if you saw True Game did his video on why your aim is all wonky all the time for most guns. I mean, it's pretty, I hope they remove some of that nonsense because it's pretty bad. But you can really choose whatever optic, but for default, I'm including the Eagle Eye just because I think it looks pretty clean. You'll kind of see how this one works. Like I said, this one is an alternative option. I wouldn't say that this is absolute meta by any means, but it is pretty fun. You can run the 60 round mag. If you want to go ahead and get rid of the mag, it will slow down the gun quite a bit, but it will give you a free attachment if you want it. Then we get into the DG56 and the Strike 9. This is a balanced class setup for this. I don't think this is necessarily the ultimate gun. It's kind of on the edge, as we saw with TTK. It fires pretty decently fast, relatively easy to use. The range is okay, and you'll kind of see how I built it out with a suppressor. And that's kind of going to be the crux on a lot of these things. You could remove this; it'll speed it up, and it will be like a faster build. And maybe you have it built that way. But you kind of see how those attachments work out. You could put on a bigger mag and maybe experiment with it because you don't like the iron sights. Maybe you put on an optic. It works pretty good. You burn through bullets pretty quickly. It really depends on where you're going to challenge at, but the gun does not move very much, and it is a solidly accurate mid-range gun. I think you could probably use it as sniper support too if you go with the 50 round mag. Again, you might have to swap out hollow point for something else that's going to give you a little bit better muzzle velocity, even though it coming in at 683 is already pretty solid. 9mm, maybe you get a little more recoil. Maybe you don't want that. The DG56, this one is a little bit interesting because it's a burst weapon. It kind of falls into that category where sometimes it could be completely broken, and then other times it feels kind of whack. And really depends on the range you're challenging your targets. You can get a 2-burst kill with this thing, but the range isn't all that far. We can go ahead and kind of look at it here when we go to the attachments. About 36 meters. Pretty solid. Obviously, some of these things aren't 100% aligned with what is actual, since these are some of the multiplayer stuff. But in general, we can kind of look at that and go, okay, they're going to get 1 burst up to a certain distance. With this particular build, you're not going to have hardly any recoil. And you want to focus on getting the 2 headshots. Even at further range, you're going to be able to beam targets. The strafing, it's going to have the rotational aim assist that kind of locks onto a target when you're shooting, and you're kind of good to go. But if you do not get the 2 bursts, it's kind of an average gun, something fun to play with. If you are within the 36 meters though, which is these first 2 targets, you can get the 2 burst kill. You just need a lot of headshots in the mix, and it can definitely be very, very broken without leaving the enemy much time to react. Again, it's kind of a feast or famine type thing. It can be amazing, and it could also be trash. The Swarm, this one is a fast firing gun. It bleeds through bullets very, very fast. Big problem with this one is the range isn't great. So you kind of have to know how to close that distance. This isn't going to be like that sniper support style SMG at all. And maybe you'd even pair this with a different gun other than the LMG, because the LMG, if you get stuck reloading, you want a little bit more versatility. You could swap out other guns on this list. But overall, here's the build for that. I kind of have it built out again with the suppressor. We do get a little bit more range with this barrel, and that's kind of the whole point of that, why I've done that. So we at least get up to 8 meters from like 5, which could be pretty low. So 50 round mag, come up, you kind of see how the iron sights work. It does have a little bit of a kick, but it does have a very solid fire rate as well. And even at those 2 targets, 25 meters, still able to hit those fairly well. This next one is just insane. Every attachment is basically broken on this gun. Literally. We go to this Bruen, and you can kind of see how it benefits it. Slight penalty to ADS speed, only 6%, but the recoil comes down quite a bit. We got this other recoil reducing stock. You're going to lower your movement, which is slow anyways. You're an LMG. But, like, look at that recoil reduction. 21%, 6, and 11% to vertical. Then we go over here to the Jack Annihilator Bullpup kit, regardless if that's actually a Bullpup kit or not. Here are everything's in green except for reload quickness. Like, all right, cool. Bullet velocity slightly lower, but 800 is plenty. All those green, even behind my camera, it's still green. And bro, like, what are we doing here? And then we have it set up so it has a 100-round mag. That will be a problem, but also not having to stop. The aim is just like ridiculous. We can just take out targets. Like, what are we doing? So this one, I'm pretty sure is going to be more of a fan favorite when it comes to it, just because the versatility is pretty solid. It's a little bit more passive because you do have a long reload. Not quite as long as the PKM from a long time ago, or at least it doesn't feel that way, but pretty solid overall. I think this is a very solid build. And that brings us to the top of the top. And although, again, I don't think this SMG is the best SMG currently in the game, I think it's probably the WSP or the Lachmann sub or the ISO. I just didn't want to do 10 loadouts of MW2 guns, so I didn't include those. But here we go. WSP is kind of an all-around solid gun. It's an Uzi, so it's a little bit slower on the fire rate side. Not really a fan of the fire rate, but if you hit your shots, this thing is pretty solid. Kind of see how the build is there. And again, slow fire rate, but it'll allow you to be reliable. Just it's kind of unforgiving if you miss shots. There's long windows between that rate of fire that will kind of slow it down a bit. But overall, pretty good gun. It's just you have to be accurate with it up close because you will, if you miss, you burn a lot of TTK. Then the WSP. I know we have a WSP. You can run the BAS meta with both of them if you really wanted to, if you don't get bored. The biggest issue with this gun is the 45-round mag. You can deal with it, definitely can, but I think sometimes that's a hindrance if you're playing quads or even trios, or you get caught reloading or something like this. But this thing is nasty with this combination of attachments. Will be very accurate. You can just swap targets. Not quite as much as the Pulemyot, but within those maybe 50 meters, it's going to be very deadly. But again, 45-round mag isn't crazy. Even the sleight of hand and the perk stuff will be nice, but it's just kind of how it works. Aim assist, take the wheel, and you're pretty good on your target acquisition, and you're pretty much good to go. If there's any other sleepers, let us know in the comments. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching as always. Have a great day.